So this is my first review for 2025. I saw Wolfman at the theaters. Now I wasn't overly excited for this movie. I had interest in this movie mainly because it directed Leon well. Like he did The Invisible Man, which I loved. He did Upgrade, which I thought was great. He did direct Insidious 3, which was his first film directing, which I wasn't a fan of. But he's 2 for 1 so far when it comes to his previous movies before this. And and I think he's just a great director. Like I think what he did with the Invisible Man, the modern remake, I thought was, like I said, fantastic. So he was the main thing that had me interested in this Wolfman remake. Now I didn't see the original Wolfman movie. I saw the 2010 movie once, but it was a long time ago, and I remember it just being it was fine. When it comes to this remake, this Wolfman movie, I thought it was okay but forgettable. So let me start with the positives. I think Chris Robat, the lead actor, I think he gives a very good, solid performance in this movie. Like I did feel sympathy for his character a little bit. I think he is the most interesting character in the movie. So I think overall he's very good in this movie. And I do like the idea of it being an infestant, like a disease. Like I like the idea where it's not a curse. It's like this does feel like a modern take on the Wolfman, where it reminds me of kind of like the Jeff Goldblum's Fly movie, so it has a lot of body horror elements in it. When it's like the transformation and how it's treated like a disease and a infestant that spreads through your body. So I thought that was a cool idea. And I like the fact that it was a slow change. Like usually in werewolf movies, you get when you get bit or scratched, you change instantly. So I like the not instantly, but you don't. But you change like early in the movie where they don't drag it out for too long. So I like the idea of being kind of a slow metamorphosis where he slowly changes. And the idea that he doesn't like you see how that it kind of affects his personality where he doesn't want to hurt his daughter and his wife around him when he's so how you don't want to hurt the people around you while you're slowly going through the chains. So I thought that was an interesting aspect to the story. And I love what they do to perspective visually when it comes to his like healing, how he heals when he's going through the chains, and how like he sees things visuals. Where it's like there's scenes where when he gets to a point where he changes that his sight is like blurry, the way he's looking at people around him. So I thought there was some cool visuals, some cool ways to how they did his perspective while he's changing, and I would say that's really all the positives for me with this movie. There's some ideas they set up that I think are interesting in this movie. Some storylines at the beginning, but there was some negatives with that where I felt like they could have fleshed out some of this stuff in this movie. So one missed aspect I do have with this movie, I'll also say this: the practical effects are good for what they are in this movie. Like this isn't a high budget movie; it's 25, I believe, the budget for the movie. I think overall the practical effects look good for what they are in this movie. The one missed aspect about this movie is that even though I like the idea of it being a slow change, because this movie's like an hour 43 minutes, I did find this movie to be a little slow though for me personally at the beginning. Where I feel like it took too long for him to change. Like I like the idea of it being a slow metamorphosis change when it comes to having that body horror element, and he slowly changes into the Wolfman. But at the same time, I felt like it took too long. I just feel like you could have had him change a little bit sooner in the movie. Like I think they just dragged out a little bit too long. So I did find at times this movie to be a little slow and kind of boring at the beginning a little bit personally. And then when it comes to the negatives, the first negative with this movie for me is that even though it sets up some interesting stuff at the beginning, like I like the idea where the main guy, Chris Evans' character, where it's kind of like dealing with the idea of a generation where you don't know the idea of not repeating your parents' mistakes. How you show at the beginning his father's a little tough on him, and you see how it doesn't like the idea of parents not the kid like a kid not repeating your parents' mistakes. How it's a generation thing. How you don't want to repeat what your parents' mistakes was, and you want to raise your kid differently. So I like that idea, but they don't go anywhere with it. And that's kind of one of the problems with with the storylines that's at the beginning is that the whole generation idea of like not wanting to repeat your parents' mistakes, him constantly telling his daughter, I'm here to protect you. And he says that constantly when it comes to like him saying to his daughter, I don't want to be like my father. I'm gonna make sure to protect you. But then as though they don't go anywhere with that storyline. You don't get payoff with that at the end. So that's one of the problems I have is that this is one of those movies that I feel like should have been like 15 or 20 minutes longer to flush out some stuff at the beginning, because I feel like you don't get any payoff at any of this at the end, and they don't really go into it. I feel like they just kind of forget about it when it comes to that storyline. And two other storylines I felt the same way about, where I'm like, when it comes to the whole, like, they have a slide at the beginning where they show that him and his wife, Julia Garner, they have some issues as husband and wife. And for me personally, they don't really dive enough into that plot point to go anywhere with it. They just set up at the beginning, and they just kind of drop it. And another negative thing about that is that I don't feel like there was any chemistry between Julian Garner and Chris Abbott in this movie. Like, I didn't feel any chemistry between those two actors at all in this movie. And I understand people bring up the fact that, well, that's what it's supposed to be that way, because they set up at the beginning that she and him are having issues. Totally get that. But I still feel like some type of, at least a little chemistry between them, and I just never bought into them at all as a couple, as a married couple. Even if they're having issues, I just didn't feel like there was anything there chemistry-wise. And it's the same thing with her and her daughter. They said this whole thing at the beginning where she can't connect with her daughter recently. But again, they don't go anywhere with that whole storyline with the mother and daughter, where she's having trouble connecting to her daughter. They just kind of like set it up and they just forget about it. And I'll be honest, I didn't really feel like there's any chemistry between her and her daughter when it comes to me feeling buying them as mother and daughter. So like I just felt like, and no offense to Junior Garner, I don't know if it was the writing or directing in this movie. I do think some of it is the writing. And I do think she's a good actress. Like Apartment 7A, I didn't like that movie, but I think she's good in that movie. But I feel like they just didn't give her a whole lot to work with in this movie. Her character is very thin, and that's one of the issues I kind of have with this movie, is that you do get some sweet moments between the father and daughter, so I would say that's another positive. But the kid even felt underwhelming to me, where I didn't really care about the daughter or his wife, because they just were very thin characters. They didn't give them a whole lot to the depth to their characters. Like, to me, they were just very forgettable and underwritten. And even though I felt something for the husband, and he was the most interesting character in the movie, I even felt by the end I didn't really feel as mostly invested in these characters as I wanted to, even in his character. So it's just for me like, they have this family drama, but I just don't, like, again, there's no payoff to any of this at the end. They don't really dive too much into it, and I think the chemistry between her, Julia Garner, Chris Abbott just isn't there. Sam Felton and the actress who plays her daughter. So I just didn't really buy the chemistry between the characters. And I would say another thing about this movie is that it's a very straightforward plot. And I felt like I wanted more out of this, like, storyline and these ideas. Like I said, they don't go anywhere with these ideas. They forget about them. There's no payoffs at the end. But even though this is a very straightforward, simple plot, I felt like you could have done more with what you set up at the beginning. So that was another problem with the movie. And there's also a lot of conveniences, especially towards the end, where I was like, okay. Like, when they try to get away from the husband, like, at the end, and they just happen to find the guy that gets cut up beginning with the gun. I was like, there's some conveniences towards the end, like you see in a horror movie sometimes, where you're just like, okay, they just happen to find the gun, happen to stumble onto a case on the gun, and just stuff like that. There's a lot of conveniences in this movie, and it's something you see in horror movies sometimes, where you just find a lot of conveniences to get the plot going. Not because it feels organically natural. It just feels like they just need to, like, they need to move to the next plot point, the next scene in the movie. So I feel like there's a little too many conveniences in this movie that worked out for the characters. And I am going to spoil something. So if you haven't seen the movie, stop the video now. But there's a twist in the movie which was very predictable. Like, when they show at the beginning that Christopher Abbott's character, that his father disappeared. and he goes to that cabin. He takes his family to that cabin, and the wolf that bites him, you find out later on, was his father. Which I thought was a very predictable twist. You saw it coming, and I didn't really feel anything when he killed him, because when he becomes the new Wolfman and they're fighting each other, like I just didn't feel anything when he killed him. Again, like as far as only at the beginning of the movie, and the whole twist just felt very predictable. I was like, oh, I saw that coming. And it kind of ends on a whimper for me, where I just felt like it ended where I was just like, okay, so that was it. It just ended on kind of like a lukewarm ending to me, where I was like, I just felt like it could have done more at the ending of this movie. Like it could have done more when it came to how this movie ends, how the story ends, how you pay off some of the stuff you set up that you don't kind of just, like I said, you forget about during the movie and just don't really go into. And it just overall, I just found the ending to be lukewarm. Now, one other negative, and this is going to be the last negative in the movie, and this is a big negative where I was worried about going into this movie, was the look of the Wolfman. Because you get two wolves in this movie. You get his dad, and then you get the main guy, Chris Evans' character, where he transforms into the Wolfman in this movie. And I'll be honest, I'm not really a fan of either designs of the characters. Like his dad looks a little bit better, and maybe the main guy, Chris Evans' character, maybe that wasn't what he was going to fully look like if he stayed in a transformation. If he stayed in the wolf form longer, like his dad in the movie. But even though I can admire the idea of it being a festin, I like that concept, but the way it looks in the movie, it just looks goofy to me. Like it's not like he doesn't look scary to me personally. Like the 2010 Wolfman movie, I thought that was forgettable too, but I think that has a much better design when it comes to looking like the classic Wolfman, and just looking more like a wolf. Like he just like the way the Wolfman looks in this movie, it just personally did not work for me in design choice. Like the practical effects look good for what it is, what they're going for, but the actual design of the Wolfman in this movie just did not work for me personally. Like I just it looked silly to me. I didn't look scary to me at all. And his dad design looks a little bit better, but I still wasn't exactly 100% a fan of that design either. And just overall, the main Wolfman in this, Chris Roberts' character, I just was not a fan of the design of the character in this movie. So at the end of the day, I think this is a movie that it has some interesting ideas to set up. I think Christopher Abbott is good in the movie. And like I said, there's some concepts with the whole them being an infesting, him slowly changing into the Wolfman. So there's some interesting ideas in this movie, and there's some cool camera. The way he shoots some scenes in this movie with the camera moving, which I thought was cool. So there's some good camera shots in this movie. I think for 25 million movie, it looks good production design wise, but I just felt like this is a movie that had a lot of interesting ideas, but they didn't flush them out enough. And overall, I didn't care about the characters at the very end of the movie. So it just for me, and I'll say this also, I didn't find this movie to have like as much great tension as The Invisible Man. Like that movie is a great example. That movie to me had a great story, character I cared about. But that Invisible Man movie also did a great job with feeling creeped out and having good tension where you, even if the Invisible Man wasn't there, you feel like that he's around somewhere. And for me, this movie, the tension in this movie just, I didn't find it as like, the tension to be as good in this movie as a movie like an Invisible Man. So, like I said, it has some good things. It has some things I felt like you could have flushed out in this movie and done better. And I think Leo, when it comes to this film track record so far, I'll put this in kind of like the mediocre films of his. Like to me, like it's watchable, but I would also say this is a movie I could say that you gotta go out and wanting to see in theaters. Like it's a perfectly okay, fine movie that I felt like I'll forget about afterwards, and not like I don't decide to go back and rewatch it again either. So that's my thoughts on Wolfman 2025. Until next time, movie fans.